So we just finished up talking about Watson, famous psychology researcher, and we talked about Skinner. So here we go. So Skinner's experiments with the pigeon, classic experiments. Some of the first that people had ever done with animals. We begin to release this whole information of coming out, like how we learn. And so then people said, okay, so do humans learn like animals? Well, that was a tough call. So we begin to look and say, okay, is Skinner right? Does it have to do with people's environment? And so we begin to start kind of putting this together. Well, meanwhile, as we begin to look at this in terms of people, we came up with a field of study called behavioral analysis. Why we do what we do. And we're still in that mode of behavioral analysis, why we do what we do. So in 1904, Ivan Pavlov, a Russian person here, had a dog, and maybe you've heard about this Pavlov's dog, P-A-V-L-O-V, Pavlov's dog. And so this is called classical conditioning. And let's talk about the experiment that led to that, because this is another part of learning. And we're in the process of behavioral analysis here to say, okay, how do animals work and how do humans work? Okay? So in Pavlov's dog, this famous experiment, the first thing Pavlov did, he had this big old dog, and he fed the dog, and the dog salivated. As the dog ate the food, the dog salivated, part of the anatomy of a dog, saying that, okay, it sensed food, so it made this saliva so it could begin to break down the food. So step one was feed the dog, and the dog salivated. Okay. Step two, so the next day the dog's hungry, we feed the dog, but at the same time we feed the dog, we ring a bell. Okay. So we ring the bell, feed the dog. What does the dog do? The dog salivates. The next day, we do the same thing. We feed the dog, we ring the bell, dog salivates. The next day, we ring the bell, feed the dog salivates. And then after doing this, and I don't know how many times he did it, but after a period of time, then Pavlov came in and he just rang the bell. Now, did he put the dog dish out? No, he didn't even put the dog dish out, because it could be you put the dog dish out and the dog salivates. Okay, that would be conditional learning, meaning that the dog sees the bowl. But instead, he just rang the bell. He just rang the bell. And as he rang the bell, the dog salivated. The dog associated, the bell with the food, which made him salivate. Okay, so that's classical conditioning. Okay, what is classical conditioning? When a stimuli, this is classical conditioning, when a stimuli results in a response, that's unconditioned, all right? So let's talk about what's the difference between let's talk about a conditioned response and an unconditioned response. A conditioned response is where the exact thing that happens that causes the dog, in this case, the conditioned response is food causes the dog to salivate, Food causes a dog to salivate. So that's a conditioned response. Feed the dog, dog salivates. Feed the dog salivates. Now, an unconditioned response means that we can get the dog to salivate without the food. So when he rang the bell and fed the dog began to associate the bell, with food, which made him salivate. So that's called the unconditioned response. All right? So the bell is the unconditioned stimuli. Even though we're conditioning them, the main conditioning stimuli and conditioning response is actually the food. So, classical conditioning, all right? We have an unconditional response. It's another outside stimuli that we're associating with that. Okay. So here we go. So we have conditioned responses and we have unconditioned responses. Now, it's kind of a misnomer. I don't want to say they're unconditioned, because you really kind of, like in Pavlov's classical conditioning, you actually conditioned yourself for the bell to cause the dog to salivate. But we have a lot of experimentation now, And we're talking about Rosen and Fallon in 1987 and a host of others. You know what they put in your book? They put et al., which means there's several people who have done experiments like this, to find out that now we have a lot of learning. We have a lot of learning that changes our conditional responses. So I wrote down a few of them here. It's kind of interesting, okay? So, for example, we might eat fudge, okay? We might eat fudge, candy, candy fudge. You might like it, you might not, assuming that you like fudge. You might eat the fudge and go, oh man, that's delicious. I love fudge, that's so good. But we also have the thinking part of our brain. So Rosen and Fallon would take these kids and they would say, okay, and adults too, and they would say, do you like fudge? Yes, and they would give them a piece of fudge, and then they would put another piece of fudge. Now, I don't want to ruin fudge for you here, okay? It's going to be a little bit of a problem as you listen to this, okay? So now we have another piece of fudge, but it's in shape of dog feces, dog poop. Now this is a problem, okay? So now, would you eat the fudge if it's in the shape of dog poop or dog feces? And the answer is probably not, because you have another response in that you've seen dog feces or dog poop when you were a little bitty kid. Somewhere you had a conditioned response that like I don't know what kind of kid you were. I don't know how you were when you were 1 or 2 years old. But maybe you picked up some dog poop. Maybe you ate some dog poop. Let's not even go there. I don't know what the deal is. So maybe you had some kind of association with dog poop, or somebody told you, oh, don't touch that. But somewhere you have a conditioned response. So Rosen and Fallon, 1987, they said, yeah, behavior is what we've learned, but now we have to look at what is the learned behavior that overrides? What's kind of the, I don't know if I want to use the term dominant, but what's the, we've got the emotional side of the brain, and then we've got the thinking side of the brain, okay? We've got you remember Plotnick's wheel, and when we talk about psychology 101, we talk about Plotnick's wheel where there's two sides to every emotion. Well, there's two sides to every behavior. So in Plotnick's wheel, we have the logical side, okay, and then we have the emotional side. So for love, okay, all right, for love, the emotional side makes me feel great, in other words, it's this caring love, okay, makes me feel joy. But on the reasoning side, it's acceptance. You remember that with Plotnick's wheel? If you haven't taken Psychology 101, boy, would love to have you. That's an awesome class. We learn about Plotnick's wheel. So in Plotnick's wheel, you've got this whole two-sided of the brain. So what's happening now is we're saying that classical conditioning is two parts of the brain too. So you like fudge, but would you eat fudge that's in the shape of dog feces? Okay, and here's what scientists are finding out. Scientists are finding out that our thinking and logical side is actually stronger than our emotional side. That our thinking side can override that, and it's a good thing because what if our emotional side overrode our thinking side, and all of a sudden here's my next example. Okay, would you drink Dr. Pepper if it had a label on it that said poison? Oh, would you drink Dr. Pepper if it had a label on it that said poison? You're like, but I like Dr. Pepper. And I like the fudge. But would I eat the fudge if it's in the shape of dog poop? No, I wouldn't. Because my thinking side would be like, no. Now, my thinking side may say, oh, I know that's really fudge, and I know that's not really dog poop. And you might reason through that, okay? But if I had a Dr. Pepper here, and I put a poison label on it, and didn't tell you that it wasn't poison, or you didn't know that it was poison, would you drink that Dr. Pepper? And so, that's what the new psychology is saying, is that your thinking side, okay, can actually override your emotional side. Okay? Well, and there's one more example here. There's one more example. Would you drink a milkshake? You could take your favorite milkshake, whether it's strawberry, chocolate, vanilla, whatever it is, would you drink a milkshake if it had a cockroach in it? You're like, well, but I really want the milkshake, but I really don't. But in my mind, I know that cockroach isn't good. Some of you be like, yeah, I would just eat that because it would override that. But what are you doing even as we do that? You're thinking about it, and your thinking side, your logical side, is having to be your decision maker. So when we have learning, now the new psychology, when we talk about behavior, we're talking about conditioned responses and unconditioned responses. And a lot of times our conditioned responses come from our emotional side, okay, and our unconditional responses come from our logical side. So it's really kind of an interesting deal. And you notice how it was so simple when I was talking about classical conditioning and Watson and Skinner, and then all of a sudden we begin talking about the conditioned responses now and unconditioned responses. So we're going to go into our next video here in just a little bit, and we'll try to we'll talk about the law of effect and new things with learning. See you then.